What happens when you chase trends, fund ideological propaganda, fill your studios with people who hate games and just want to push messages, while purging the true talent who put you at the top in the first place? Well, you get every AAA studio in gaming, it seems. But today, let's take a look at the king by default of console gaming, Sony. They shut down 8 out of 12 live service games after failures and billions of dollars wasted. Many live service games gone forever, and consider also all the single player games not made while they pursued this, like a lost decade of games. Clearly, they've given up on the push. Helldivers 2 was a success, but so many others did poorly. Whether that's exclusives like Foam Stars, or Sony projects like Concord being one of the gaming's biggest bombs. And then Sony's network drops out for a day, the PSN going down like the fall and rise of a phoenix. The guy who went all in on Concord, Herman Hulst, is out as CEO, a rare executive completely failing at his job and actually getting some consequences. Xbox, maybe it's time to do the same to Phil. Meanwhile, Sony is supposedly laying off much of their California staff after making such a big deal of moving operations there, following the successes of God of War, Last of Us, and Horizon. This might all be a great thing, this could be a positive direction, if they are trying to get out of Western influences. Due to just how puritanical and toxic Western corporate devs have proven to be in terms of cultural colonialism, and how they try to push the DEI religion with force, threats, and blacklisting. That's great on its own, and it would make sense. There's so much damage done, so much failure, the great brand damage, as Western gaming professionals constantly attack customers and ruin studios from the inside. Any sensible business would want to avoid this. And it's not like this is untested. At this point, we have over a decade across multiple entertainment industries of indisputable proof that wokeness ruins everything it touches. Could Concord have succeeded if it looked like Marvel Rivals? Would a Last of Us live service game have been worth keeping if Joel were alive and the audience had the positive vibes after the first game rather than the anger after the second? We may never know, but getting out of games as a service may be wise nonetheless, due to how many failures and cancellations they have, all due to their own lack of skill, to their own terrible choices. But at the same time, the industry has proven these games can do very well. Between games like Zenless Zone Zero, Marvel Rivals, Palworld, Path of Exile 2, Monster Hunter The Last Descendant, and even Sony's Helldivers 2, just in 1 year, we saw numerous major successes in a game type that has been constantly referred to as too bloated, too entrenched. There's too many games with too much presence already. There's no way anyone could ever dethrone them. There's long-term behemoths, and with an audience that is just fatigued from it all. Yet in a year, all these games find major success. However, maybe Sony is just not equipped for this, and maybe Helldivers was a fluke. Getting out of Western-style games and leaving live service behind might just be the decision they need to make. So what will their focus be going forward? The last few years have consisted of massive budget, cinematic, heavy, story-focused games. Last of Us, Horizon, God of War. These games have generally done fairly well, but they're also very expensive and time-consuming to make, effectively trying to make 100 million plus blockbusters all the time. And while their first entries were all major hits, the second ones may have done well, but they also went hand in hand with far more controversy than praise, the type of thing that can hurt a third entry or any future entries. Fungal Zombie Contact Golf being the most divisive game of all time. But right now, companies might be starting to realize when lines are divided, with journalists loving it and people who pay for the game hating it, it can start to hurt their bottom line. Their live service huge budget games, Concord, is rumored to be up to $400 million. That's just insane. And we may see a similar disaster with Marathon and Fair Games. And by may, I mean absolutely will. So what's next? Could they return to their roots? Ratchet and Clank, Astrobot, or what we'd expect from the 90s? Add Spyro, Jak and Daxter, Crash Bandicoot, and while it's hard to compete with Nintendo, Astrobot actually did. And it is pure fun, it is whimsy, and there's no preaching, no pandering like all their high-budget cinematic games love to do. Legacy of Kain, Legend of Dragoon, Rogue Galaxy, Dark Cloud, Infamous, Resistance, Killzone, and there's no doubt dozens more franchises on your mind. These don't need high budgets. If Space Marine 2 can be AAA on a AA budget, they can make a good Resistance or Killzone for half the price of any of their cinematic games. And it'll still do well, and you can make a new Crash or Jak and Daxter for even less. Or pursue something new, like Astrobot or like Stellar Blade. Point is, there's a lot of room for them to have moderate to small teams working with small budgets, making games in less time, that end up being great, a reversal of their current business strategy. Repeating what they did during the PSX and PS2 eras, arguable the golden age not only for Sony, but for console games before online multiplayer took over. There is no reason to not focus on making small games with small studios, and as they find success, building them up. Trying to go from $0 to $400 million, like they did with Concord, is just absolutely insane. Most studios didn't do that. BioWare took years to get to Baldur's Gate, years more to Neverwinter Nights, more to Mass Effect and Dragon Age, and then unfortunately more to Veilguard and Anthem. Blizzard didn't start with Diablo 2, World of Warcraft, and Overwatch. Mario started as a guy that jumps. Now, there's a fighting, kart racing, RPG, ghost hunting, and party franchise, and much more based on this guy that once just a guy that jumped. Perhaps I'm a fool. Scratch that. I am absolutely a complete fool. So when I say Sony could turn things around and return to what made them absolute kings early on, I do so with a complete disregard for reality or reason. Still, when AAA and corporate entertainment is at such an extreme low, all that really can be done is to push my imagination to the limit on what could make gaming great again, since the people at these studios seem to have forgotten what an imagination is. So what would I want to see? What would cause a return to form for Sony if they were to keep fighting, as if Microsoft was still behaving like a trillion-dollar competitor and not crying that they lost last generation, so it's game over for them? Instead of just complaining about everything that's going wrong with the industry, something that's very easy to do because there's always something very wrong going on with the industry, sometimes it's actually a nice idea to think of what could make the industry just a little bit better. 1. Bring back every franchise people are asking for. Yes, all of them. None of this, well, people now wouldn't want a Killzone, or it wouldn't work in today's modern climate. Nobody cares. You guys thought Concord would work. If these games could make it decades ago, they can still make it today. Nintendo is nearing half a century selling the same games to people who love them for it. Heck, Pokemon hasn't changed since the Game Boy. We still have side-scrolling Marios. We had a top-down Link to the Past Between Worlds, a side-scrolling Samus game, nostalgia collections for Street Fighter, Mega Man, Castlevania. You clean up some of the controls, 9 out of 10 retro games could still work today, and are still working today. Baldur's Gate 3 takes and upgrades a genre I first touched with Shattered Sun. Now, bring back Dark Sunken if you really want to see the Wookiee scry. Persona 5 and Metaphor maintain the Shin Megami Tensei series that started in 1987. Astrobot is an N64 game with a controller that doesn't rip your palms to shreds. Meanwhile, simple games like Vampire Survivors, Animal Well, Lethal Company, Among Us can become genre definers. Point is, if you bring up a game made between 1980 and 2010, there is a 2020 version of it on the market right now, and there's no reason Sony couldn't be doing this as well. Suggestion number 2. As mentioned, many small studios, small budgets, small projects. When you do get studios capable of doing something big, like, for example, Bloodborne, don't mess with it. We all get that with Western Sony, they were interfering and shuttering all sorts of projects that could do well, and hindering studios that had proven success. Ideological community managers messed with Helldivers 2. All while your censorship-loving bigwigs ruined well-liked series such as Senran Kagura and forced nerfs and censorship on most of your beloved games and partners in Japan, despite your Western games having no limits, as seen from the copious amounts of depravity and forced sex in games like Last of Us 2, and not really having a problem when it's Baldur's Gate 3 being uncensored and full of animal porking, which is fine. The problem is the double standard. Sex nudity, a-okay with Western games that had realistic graphics and in many cases real-life models, but curvy women revealing outfits is banned if it's an anime girl? People know this is due to Western interference and Puritanism. We are aware the government interferes with US aids. We know about credit card companies forcing pressure on behalf of the United Nations and World Economic Forum. We know your Western office is ideologically captured by extremism. You're gonna have to buck all of that pressure and forge ahead doing what gamers want if you want to stay at the top. This may sound overly optimistic, but there is a path for Sony to go unshitify itself. To ignore the DEI retards who told them Concord's pandering would resonate with gamers, and to ignore the corporate retards who told them Concord was worth buying the studio and pumping $400 million into it and would definitely make back its investment. Question is, does Sony want to remain a viable alternative to PC gaming? Firing everyone involved with the decisions that lost you billions of dollars as they used your platform to sell ideology instead of video games, that's a good start. There is one more thing you may want to consider. You have two fairly unique gimmicks at your disposal. VR has room to grow, but yours is the most accessible, and if you want to tap a market who wants virtual reality, consider looking at the fantasies that people have. Look at Genshin Impact, Zenless Zone Zero, Nikkei. And of course, let's not forget the ladies. We need to include women, right? So let's look at LNDS, or LADS, or whatever it's called. By the way, go check out this game for a moment if you want to see why feminists are completely full of shit. They're awfully quiet about the female gaze on this one, despite a decade plus of harping on men for the exact same thing. Your other gimmick is the controller. You won Game of the Year for a game revolving around it, yet there's almost nothing else taking advantage of all that technology you packed into that thing. And, unlike the virtual reality, anyone with the console has access to it, so there's no barrier to entry. Think about what this could do to make walking simulators, puzzle games like Talos or Myst, horror games. Add a tactile element that can enhance the gameplay. That's about all I have to say about Sony at the moment, but you know, it would be kind of funny if it's all the employees that are getting fired that are attacking the servers on the way out. Seems to just match up a little too well. But hey, if you've been let go, good news. Wizards of the Coast is currently hiring anyone who has been responsible for destroying decades worth of popular franchises. Because apparently, D&D and Magic the Gathering still aren't bad enough for them.